Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
The main character, after dying in his previous life, he wakes up as Tony's brother inside of Marvel, and he creates the Zerg Queen. What is he gonna do inside of Marvel?
Marvel, reborn as the brother of Tony Stark, bio-genius, create Queen Zerg at the start. Chapter 1, Morning in the Lab. I woke up early, the same way I had every day for years. The light through the blinds wasn't harsh, just steady, a pale yellow that touched the far wall before it reached me. I rolled out of bed, feet pressing against the floor, and stretched until my joints gave the small cracks I expected. I didn't waste much time sitting around in the mornings. Routine was important. Routine meant control. It had been 25 years since I opened my eyes in this life, crying as an infant in a mansion far too large for anyone's comfort. I remembered everything from before. The rush of a truck horn, the sharp brightness of headlights, and then nothing. That had been my end. But then I opened my eyes again as a Stark. Not Tony's twin, not his equal in age, but his younger brother, 5 years apart. That difference shaped everything. Tony had always been ahead of me in every milestone, not because I was slow, but because he was older. By the time I was 10, he was already 15, already building, already charming and reckless. By the time I turned 15, he was 20 and already on magazine covers, already the heir to Howard's empire, already too busy to notice much of what I was doing. I never resented it. It gave me cover to work without attention. He was the genius of machines, of weapons, of metal and circuits. I was the genius of biology. My path was never going to be his, and that was the point. I pulled on a shirt, simple clothes I didn't care if I ruined with stains, and walked out of my room into the hall. My apartment wasn't extravagant, nothing like the mansions Tony preferred or the villas Howard had kept. It was mine, spacious enough to hold equipment, private enough to keep eyes away, secure enough that I didn't worry about interruptions. I made my way down the hall and pushed open the door to my lab. The smell hit first. Sterilized air, faint traces of honey, and a sharper edge of chemicals I kept tightly sealed. The lights hummed softly, illuminating rows of enclosures, incubators, and instruments. At the center of it all was today's focus. The bee, or at least what most people would call a bee. It sat inside its enclosure, crawling along the edge of the glass, as if searching for a way out. Its body carried the familiar structure, segmented legs, fine hairs that picked up vibrations, translucent wings that twitched with restless energy. But its color wasn't yellow and black. I had engineered its pigmentation into muted shades of blue, a soft glow under the light. Its abdomen was swollen, reshaped by my design, containing a reservoir I had altered in its genome. This wasn't nature's bee, this was mine. I set my notes on the desk, pulled on gloves, and leaned closer to inspect it. "Good morning," I said quietly, more habit than conversation. The creature responded not to my words, but to the vibrations in the room. Its wings buzzed once, then twice, then it settled. I picked up the logbook and began writing observations. Wing activity consistent with previous trials. Abdomen swelling stable. No abnormal twitching. I tapped the glass once. The bee shot upward, hovered, then landed again. Responsive. The past 25 years moved through my mind as I worked. Childhood was different when you were the younger Stark. Howard was never kind, but his attention always leaned on Tony. I was an afterthought more often than not. Maria tried harder, but she could only do so much under Howard's shadow. I learned quickly to keep to myself, to build my own world, to find comfort in knowledge that no one else was watching. Tony was my brother, though, and I teased him constantly. I cracked jokes about his late nights, his drinking, his endless projects. He threw them back at me with his own sharp wit. We understood each other even if we didn't always ask questions about the other's work. He knew I spent hours in labs. I knew he spent hours in garages and boardrooms. We didn't pry. That distance suited us both. I pulled a syringe from the rack, filled with a nutrient mix I had designed. Carefully, I slid it into the feeding port of the enclosure. The bee reacted immediately, extending its proboscis and latching onto the feed. Its abdomen pulsed gently as it drank. I made another note. Feeding efficiency optimal. No resistance to nutrient change. I leaned back in my chair, arms folding across my chest, and let my thoughts drift. Tony. He wasn't here. He wasn't even in the country. By now, everyone knew what had happened. Tony Stark, genius, playboy, billionaire, had been captured in Afghanistan, attacked by his own weapons. The world was calling it a tragedy. Pepper was panicking. Rhodey was moving mountains trying to get answers. The board at Stark Industries was probably tearing its hair out. And I let it happen. Because I knew. Tony needed this. He needed the cave, the shrapnel, the fear, the realization. Without it, he would never stop selling weapons without thinking. He would never stop drowning himself in parties and women and distractions. He would never build what he was about to build. So I stayed back. I didn't interfere. I didn't even try. I picked up my pen again and forced my focus back onto the bee. This was my world, not his. My work was about living systems, not iron shells. I wasn't making weapons, not exactly. I was building possibilities, a delivery system that could replace needles, pollinators that could survive environments where pesticides killed everything else, scouting organisms that could fly through air too toxic for humans. Every part of this project had potential. I reached into the second enclosure and lifted out another subject, smaller, an earlier iteration. It flapped weakly, unable to sustain flight for more than a few seconds before collapsing against the mesh. A failure, but a useful one. I logged the weakness, compared it to the new model, and adjusted the incubator settings by a fraction of a degree. Hours passed this way. Measurements, feeding tests, wing endurance trials, reaction to sound, everything written down carefully. Every so often, my mind returned to Tony. He would be in pain right now. His chest torn by shrapnel, his body weak, his pride broken. But that pain would change him. That suffering would forge him into something new. I smiled faintly at the thought, not because I enjoyed his suffering, but because I trusted the man he would become after it. "You'll be fine," I murmured, though I wasn't speaking to the bee. I stood, stretched again, and moved toward the storage cabinet. My hands worked automatically, pulling out vials, prepping samples, setting up another round of tests. The hum of equipment was the only background noise, steady and constant. This was my life now. Not the one I lost under the headlights of a truck, not the one Howard wanted for me, not even the one Tony lived with his machines and his fame. This was mine. And I intended to use it fully. Chapter 2. The Shape of a Hive. I set my notes aside and focused on the bee's enclosure. The latest trial had stabilized better than I expected. Its wings held longer, its feeding response was clean, and it showed no abnormal spasms. That gave me enough confidence to move to the next step. I opened the drawer at my station and pulled out the thin coil of synthetic string I had prepared the night before. It wasn't ordinary string. Each thread was coated in a solution I had developed to act as a stimulant, interacting with the modified receptors I had introduced into the bee system. The idea was simple. Once the stimulant entered its body, it would trigger the dormant coding in its cells, forcing a rapid shift in size and structure. I threaded the string through a small feeding port and let it drop in. The bee twitched, antennae tapping against the air as it investigated, its proboscis extended and brushed against the thread. After a moment, it latched on. The reaction started quickly. The abdomen pulsed first, swelling as the altered genome activated. Its wings buzzed louder, vibrating against the glass. The body expanded, joints clicking as they restructured. The color deepened, the faint glow of blue becoming sharper, the legs thickening. I watched as the once fragile frame bulked up, the creature taking on a heavier, more alien profile. It was working. The bee was becoming what I wanted, something closer to the Zerg-like design I had imagined. Not a simple insect anymore, but a template for something bigger. I wrote every detail into the logbook. Stimulation successful. Immediate structural growth triggered. Abdomen expansion 43% over baseline. Wing endurance increased. Mandible thickness greater than projected. I leaned back, smiling at the sight. This was what I had been aiming for, to take a hive-based insect and push it beyond its natural limits. Bees were only the beginning. Ants, termites, wasps, any creature with an instinct for hive cooperation could be modified, amplified, repurposed. I wanted to see if I could replicate the efficiency of a hive mind on a scale no one had attempted. My mind drifted back to my old life. I remembered sitting in front of a screen, hours slipping by as I watched videos of ant colonies being built from scratch. One queen dropped into a tank of soil, carving tunnels, laying eggs, raising workers. Slowly, piece by piece, a colony formed. I never lost interest in those videos. It fascinated me how one insect could start something so organized and enduring. Now I had the chance to make something like that myself. I tapped the glass enclosure again. The enlarged bee turned, mandibles clicking softly. It pressed its legs against the surface, wings buzzing in short bursts. Its behavior was the same, but the power behind it was different. "Good girl," I said lightly. "You're doing great." It wasn't just about the science. This project had a purpose. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. When the time came, this creature and the hive that followed it would be my way of stepping in. Tony was still with the 10 rings. He was enduring pain, fear, and revelation. I needed him to go through that. But once he was ready to come back, I intended to use this bee, or more accurately, what this bee would become, to help him. I wasn't going to leave him to die. I moved to the console and adjusted the environmental controls. Temperature steady at 27 degrees Celsius. Humidity increased by 5%. The bee's behavior responded within seconds, wings vibrating more slowly as it adjusted. I scribbled another note. Environmental stability confirmed. Growth sustainable beyond initial surge. The growth itself hadn't stopped yet. The bee was larger than any natural specimen, nearly the size of my hand now, though still confined to the enclosure. Its legs pressed harder against the glass, its abdomen flexing with steady rhythm. I didn't flinch. The glass was reinforced, and the size increase was within projected limits. I set another coil of stimulant string into the port, careful to note the time. The bee found it immediately, consuming faster this round. The second surge hit harder. Its thorax widened, mandibles clacked louder, and its wings grew translucent veins that glistened under the lights. I leaned close, eyes sharp, logging every second. Secondary growth phase triggered. Rapid cellular expansion, consistent with design. I set the pen down for a moment and watched in silence. It looked less like a bee now, and more like the early form of something new. Its shape had crossed a threshold. The structure reminded me of the Zerg I had studied in concept art years ago, only this was real. This was alive. I couldn't help but grin. Now you're starting to look the part. The bee's wings buzzed sharply, the sound filling the lab. It rammed the side of the enclosure once, testing the boundaries. I didn't react with worry. I only made another note. Behavioral aggression, increased post-second stimulation. Containment effective. I walked around the enclosure, checking the seals, then came back to my desk. This was only one, but one was enough to prove the concept. If I could stabilize the genome, ensure the growth process didn't collapse the subject, then I could replicate it. Dozens, hundreds, each connected, each operating as part of a hive structure. A queen at the center directing the swarm. The memory of that YouTube video played again in my head. One queen ant, starting alone, building an empire beneath glass. I had admired it back then. Now I wanted to recreate it, but on my terms. I pulled open another drawer and lifted out the container with several smaller bees, the earlier unmodified subjects. They buzzed weakly, ordinary compared to the giant in the main enclosure. They would be next. Each one a new attempt, each one a step closer to the hive I wanted. But I wasn't rushing. I set the container back, closed the drawer, and returned my attention to the enlarged bee. It had stopped growing for now, holding steady at its new size. Its body twitched occasionally, wings fluttering in short bursts. The abdomen flexed, mandibles scraped against the glass. I tapped the logbook one more time. Stabilization phase achieved. No immediate rejection symptoms. I rested my chin in my hand, smiling again. "You're going to do well," I said, "but you're not ready yet. Not until I'm sure you can handle what's coming." The bee buzzed again, as if answering. Chapter 3, The First Queen. I left the enclosure behind and walked down the hall to the next room. The door slid open smoothly, and the air inside greeted me with the faint hum of hundreds of small lives moving at once. This was the collection room. Every enclosure lined neatly across the walls contained a different species, each one carefully labeled, carefully maintained. There were ants, dozens of types. Leafcutters, bullet ants, fire ants, carpenter ants, more than one colony of each, because a scientist couldn't risk losing progress to a single accident. Beside them, termites in transparent soil tanks, their tunnels winding through the dirt like a diagram of order. Wasps in climate-controlled cages. Beetles of all kinds, some burrowers, some flyers. Every hive or colony-based insect I could acquire and sustain was represented here. It had taken years to assemble, years of study, transport, negotiation, and care. Each one was part of the larger picture, each one a potential candidate for the project. I wanted them all, not because I was greedy, but because I couldn't know in advance which species would adapt best to the modifications I was designing. The room itself was quiet except for the faint clicking of mandibles against glass and the occasional buzz of wings. I walked past the rows slowly, checking notes on clipboards, looking for irregularities. The colonies were healthy. The queens were fed. Everything was stable. I was halfway through the room when I heard it. The sound of shattering glass. It came from the lab I had just left. Sharp, sudden, too loud to be anything else. My chest tightened with sudden alertness, and I turned immediately, moving fast down the hall. My shoes hit the floor in quick, steady beats until I burst back into the lab. The enclosure was broken. The bee had outgrown its space faster than projected. Its size had more than doubled since I last checked, now towering over the fragments of shattered glass. The body was thick, the mandibles long and sharp, the abdomen swelled like a living engine. Its wings buzzed, the sound deeper now, heavy enough to rattle the lights. For a second, I just stared. Then I smiled, wide, unrestrained. "You grew faster than I thought," I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. The creature turned toward me, antennae twitching, mandibles clacking. Most people would have panicked. Most would have run. I only stepped closer. I didn't see danger. I saw success. I pulled a reinforced containment unit from the wall, opened it carefully, and coaxed the massive bee inside. It resisted at first, wings buzzing hard enough to stir the air, but I tapped the side with the same rhythm I had been using during tests. Recognition flickered. The creature settled long enough for me to close the unit. I wheeled it out of the lab, down the hall, and to the elevator at the far end. The panel opened with a scan of my hand, and the descent began. The basement wasn't a basement in the usual sense. It was a world beneath the world. Thousands of acres stretched out below, purchased quietly and reinforced with money funneled through shell companies. $10 billion, maybe more, had gone into this space. It was built for one purpose: hive development. The air down here was carefully managed, humidity and temperature controlled by vast systems humming through the walls. Light filters mimicked day and night cycles. The soil had been transporting from different parts of the world, each section designed for a specific species, needs. There were meat reserves stored in refrigerated chambers, enough to sustain thousands of organisms for years if needed. And at the center was the hive base. It was a structure I had designed myself, carved into the ground and shaped to support growth. Wide chambers with soft soil for egg laying. Caverns humidified for larval development. Elevated platforms for winged drones to test flight. Every detail had been planned, every resource already stocked. I wheeled the container across the floor and set it at the edge of the hive base. The bee shifted restlessly inside, its size pressing against the reinforced walls. "Welcome home," I said with a grin. I opened the container. The bee emerged slowly, legs scraping against the ground. It stretched its wings once, then settled into the soil. Its antennae twitched constantly, taking in the environment. It was instinct. It knew this place was made for it. It moved forward, mandibles opening and closing, abdomen flexing as if testing the new space. I watched it with my arms crossed, satisfied. This is where you'll start. This is where the hive begins. The queen needed a proper place to lay eggs, and the hive base was perfect. I had designed it to encourage expansion, with tunnels already carved and humidity balanced exactly to support rapid development. She would take it from here, but I had given her the foundation. I left her there, watching for several minutes as she explored, then turned back toward the elevator. Back upstairs, I walked to the desk and retrieved another coil of the stimulant string. This one was different. The solution coating it carried not just the growth trigger, but the loyalty bond. It had taken months of work, but I had built a chemical key into the design. Any insect that consumed it would imprint on me, not just biologically, but behaviorally. Loyalty wasn't optional. It was built in. I fed the string into the port of another enclosure, this time with one of the smaller test bees. It latched on immediately. The reaction would take time, but I wasn't worried. The bond always held. I smiled again, cheerful. Soon enough, you'll all know who to follow. I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other. The hum of the lab filled the silence. Downstairs, the queen was adjusting to her new world. Upstairs, more subjects were beginning their transformations. It was all coming together. Chapter 4. The Colonies Awaken. The alarm buzzed softly on the desk. I slapped it silent and sat up, hair still messy from the night. The blinds across the window let in only a strip of light. I stretched my arms until my shoulders cracked, then got to my feet. My morning routine was steady. Wake up, head straight for the lab, and check the night's progress. I padded barefoot down the hall, opened the lab door, and flicked on the lights. The brightness flooded over the rows of enclosures, glass walls lining the room like silent guardians. The hum of ventilators filled the background, steady as always. I stopped halfway in and stared. Half of them were dead. The stillness gave it away. Ants curled into motionless clumps, wasps fallen on their backs, termites collapsed in the tunnels I had provided for them. Even some of the beetles, which I thought would be the hardiest, had failed. The stimulant string had worked for some, but burned others out completely. The survivors, though, were moving. Ants larger than my fingers scurried along the enclosure walls, mandibles clicking, antennae twitching. Termites the size of rats dug into the soil, dragging clumps to reinforce their tunnels. Wasps, wings stretched wider than my hand, buzzed against the mesh, their movements aggressive but controlled. Even a few of the beetles had doubled in size, their carapaces thicker, mandibles snapping against the feeding ports. And then there was the queen bee. Not only had she lived, she had laid eggs. A cluster of them glistened at the edge of her enclosure, translucent and new. She was already beginning her role as a founder. I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. Not bad at all. I pulled my gloves on, grabbed the reinforced transport units, and got to work. First came the ants. Each colony was divided carefully, the surviving drones scooped into carriers, while I kept the queens separate for safety. The bullet ants were restless, their enlarged mandibles striking against the glass as I moved them, but the containment held. Fire ants swarmed in their unit, the sheer number of them making the container buzz with activity. Carpenter ants were steadier, carrying bits of substrate with them even as I transferred them. Next were the termites. Their expanded size made them slower but powerful. I used scoops to lift chunks of soil with workers and soldiers still embedded inside, sliding them into their carriers without disrupting the tunnels too much. Their queens were already bloated, swollen with potential. The wasps were the most aggressive. I had to work carefully, using protective shields to guide them into their containers. Their buzzing filled the lab, sharp and angry, wings smashing against the barriers. But one by one, I got them in. Finally, the beetles. Their strength was clear as they pressed against the scoops, mandibles cutting through pieces of substrate. But they were easier to manage once inside their units, their heavy bodies settling quickly. By the time I finished, sweat was running down my back. I leaned on the desk for a moment, catching my breath. The failures, the bodies of the dead, I bagged separately, sealed tight, marked for later study. Every death mattered. Every miscalculation had to be recorded. But the survivors were what counted. I wheeled the transport carts toward the far side of the hall to the elevator. The panel scanned my palm, then the doors slid open. The hum of machinery filled the space as the platform lowered us down into the basement. The air hit immediately. Warm, humid, heavy, with the controlled balance I had designed. The underground facility stretched out endlessly, thousands of acres beneath the surface, hidden from anyone who might care to look. I pushed the carts out, wheels rolling smoothly over reinforced flooring. The hive base spread before me like a second world. Soil pits lined the left side, enriched with minerals. Elevated feeding platforms stood in the center, already prepared with nutrient trays. Humidity chambers glowed faintly at the edges, designed for egg incubation. Tunnels stretched into the deeper zones, pre-carved but ready for expansion. Everything had been engineered, every inch tuned to support the insects as they grew. And the queen bee had wasted no time. She was there, abdomen swollen, guarding the cluster of eggs she had laid overnight. Her wings flexed once, mandibles scraping softly against the soil. She was calm, steady, focused. "Good girl," I said under my breath, grinning. One by one, I released the survivors. The ants poured out first, spreading quickly across the soil pits, antennae twitching as they mapped their new home. Bullet ants claimed one corner, fire ants another. Carpenter ants immediately began dragging soil, starting their tunnels. The queens were set in separate chambers, each given the humidity they needed. The termites followed, moving sluggishly at first until they hit soil. Then instinct took over. Soldiers spread out, jaws open, while workers burrowed quickly, dragging clumps behind them. The queens settled heavily into the chambers I had prepared. The wasps burst from their containers the second I opened them. Their buzzing filled the air, loud and sharp, but they quickly found the elevated perches built into the base. They claimed the higher platforms, wings brushing against one another, mandibles already pulling at the nutrient trays. The beetles lumbered out, slower but steady. They dragged meat scraps into corners, their mandibles clicking rhythmically. Some pushed soil into small mounds, already shaping their own areas. I stepped back and watched as the hive base came alive. Each species moved to its role, no hesitation, no confusion. It was raw instinct, magnified by my work. Time to feed them properly. I crossed to the cold storage chamber, keyed in the code, and swung the heavy door open. Racks upon racks of frozen meat filled the space. Beef slabs, whole chickens, sides of pork, everything I had stockpiled in advance. I pulled a container free, set it onto the cart, and wheeled it back. The insects reacted immediately when I opened it. Mandibles clicked, wings buzzed. Even the queen bee stirred from her eggs, her antennae twitching at the scent. I set slabs of meat onto the feeding platforms. Ants swarmed over them, cutting strips and carrying them back. Termites gnawed into softer cuts, dragging fibers into their tunnels. Wasps descended in groups, tearing chunks and pulling them back to their perches. Beetles clamped down hard, shredding pieces with sheer force. The air filled with sound, chewing, buzzing, scraping, dragging. I folded my arms and watched, smiling wide. "Eat up, you'll need your strength." For an hour I stayed among them, adjusting soil moisture, checking the humidity levels, logging egg production. The queen bee laid another small cluster, abdomen pulsing steadily. The ants dug deeper, tunnels expanding quickly. Termites reinforced walls with chewed fibers. Wasps circled the chamber restlessly, then returned to feed. Beetles pushed meat to corners, carving out their own storage. Satisfied, I returned to the elevator. Back upstairs, I walked into the control room. A wall of screens waited, each one linked to cameras hidden throughout the hive base. I dropped into the chair, leaned back, and powered the feeds. The queen bee filled one monitor, crouched over her growing cluster of eggs. Another showed the ant colonies, their tunnels branching deeper into the soil. A third displayed the termites, soldiers stationed at tunnel entrances while workers dragged meat inside. On another screen, the wasps perched along the platforms, tearing apart scraps with perfect rhythm. The beetles appeared on the lowest feeds, pushing soil and meat to shape their space. I switched between angles slowly, absorbing every detail. Every movement mattered. Every action proved the hive project was alive. I grinned, cheerful and steady. This was exactly how it was supposed to be. Chapter 5. Flight with the Queen. I turned off the camera feeds one by one until the control room went dark. The monitors powered down, leaving the faint hum of the air systems as the only sound. I leaned back in the chair, tapped my fingers against the armrest once, then stood. The colonies downstairs would manage themselves. The ants would keep digging, the termites would keep chewing, the wasps would keep feeding, and the beetles would keep pushing soil into mounds. The systems I had built into the underground base would keep the environment steady. I didn't need to watch them every second. It was time to move. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, dialed the secure line, and ordered the jet. The pilot on the other end confirmed immediately. I gave the departure time and location, then ended the call. No extra words. The Stark name and the right accounts were enough. I walked down the hall and took the elevator to the lower levels again. The Queen Bee's chamber was waiting. She was larger now, almost 5 feet tall when she stood fully, her abdomen swollen, her mandibles longer and sharper than they had been yesterday. Her wings buzzed softly when I entered, filling the chamber with the sound. At her feet, the cluster of eggs glistened in the soil. I crouched near the glass and studied them closely. Some were already shifting faintly inside their shells. Hatching was close. I smiled. "You've been busy." I unlocked the reinforced gate and guided her out carefully. She resisted at first, antennae twitching rapidly, but I tapped the ground twice in the rhythm I had been using since the first trials. She calmed, mandibles clicking softly as she moved forward. Her bulk was heavy, but I had prepared for this. The transport cage was large, reinforced steel lined with mesh to allow air. I coaxed her in, making sure her wings had space to move. Once she was inside, I sealed the door and checked the locks twice. Next came the eggs. I lifted them carefully, one cluster at a time, and set them into padded trays within the cage. There were dozens, enough to fill several compartments. The faint shifting grew stronger as I worked. "Right on schedule," I said under my breath. With the queen and her eggs secured, I wheeled the cage out of the chamber and into the elevator. The doors shut, the platform rose, and soon I was back in the upper levels. I guided the cage down the hall, through the side exit, and into the covered loading bay. The pilot had texted me confirmation that the jet was fueled and waiting. The transport van I kept for projects like this was parked nearby. I lowered the cage onto the lift, slid it inside, and locked it down. The van's engine roared to life as I climbed into the driver's seat. The drive to the airstrip was uneventful. The cage rattled lightly in the back as the queen shifted, her wings buzzing every few minutes. I kept the radio off, the silence steady. When I reached the strip, the jet was already waiting on the tarmac. Sleek, polished, engines humming faintly in idle. The pilot stood near the stairs, clipboard in hand. "Everything's set, sir," he said. I gave him a quick nod. "Good, let's get moving." 2 ground crewmen helped transfer the cage onto the jet, their faces tense but silent. They had no idea what was inside. I had made sure they didn't ask questions. Money had that effect. Inside the jet, the cage was secured in the cargo hold. I checked the locks again, then settled into one of the leather seats in the passenger cabin. The engines roared louder, the jet taxied, then lifted smoothly into the air. For the first hour, everything was quiet. The pilot announced our altitude, then left me to myself. I leaned back, eyes half shut, listening to the steady hum of the engines. Then I heard it, the faint, sharp crack of shells splitting. I stood and walked back into the cargo hold. The eggs were hatching. One by one, the shells broke open. Larvae emerged, slick and twitching, then rapidly grew as the stimulant in their system activated. Within minutes, their wings sprouted, mandibles sharpened, and their bodies hardened. 30 in total, each one almost the size of a small dog, buzzing faintly as they clung to the mesh walls of the cage. The queen stood tall in the center, her wings vibrating as she looked over them. Her antennae brushed across the young, guiding them. They responded immediately, clustering around her, moving in perfect coordination. I grinned, resting my hands on the bars. Welcome to the world. The loyalty compound in the stimulant would bind them to me as surely as it bound their queen. They wouldn't turn on me. They wouldn't question commands. Their eyes locked on me when I tapped the cage twice, wings buzzing in unison. The jet touched down after several hours. The landing was smooth, the cabin rattling lightly as the wheels hit the runway. The engines powered down, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Arrival complete, sir. I unbuckled, moved to the cargo hold, and unlocked the cage restraints. The ground crew outside lowered the ramp, and I guided the queen and her brood out under the cover of night. The air was cooler here, darker, the sky filled with stars, perfect conditions. We moved quickly, the queen's wings buzzing as she followed my lead. The brood clustered around her, 30 strong, their movements sharp but coordinated. I had prepared a van at this location as well, stocked with supplies and reinforced for transport. I loaded them inside, the space tight but manageable. Once everything was secured, I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet. The headlights cut through the dark. I drove steadily, the hum of the brood filling the back. Tonight wasn't about settling them. Tonight was about the next step. It was time to find the 10 rings. I pulled out the tablet mounted on the dash and opened the satellite tracker I had tied into Stark Industries systems. Tony's captors weren't invisible. Their camps had patterns, their convoys left trails, their transactions could be traced. It was only a matter of connecting the data. The screen lit up with coordinates, heat signatures, and movement trails. I zoomed in, cross-referenced locations, and marked the areas that matched. A handful of regions stood out, desert camps where activity had spiked since Tony's capture. I smiled, cheerful, tapping one of the marks. Looks like we've got a trail. The queen shifted behind me, wings buzzing louder. The brood answered in unison, their sound filling the van. I tightened my grip on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Chapter 6, Brothers in the Cave. The desert stretched wide under the headlights of the van. Sand rolled in waves on either side of the road, the air dry and heavy. The queen shifted in the back, her wings buzzing softly, the brood answering with low vibrations that made the air hum. They were restless, ready to move. The tracker on the dash showed the coordinates I already knew by memory. In my past life, I had seen this camp on a screen, watched it through shaky cameras, knew exactly where Tony was being held. The 10 rings had dug themselves into this stretch of desert, hidden from easy eyes but not from me. The road ended, the sand swallowing the tires. I slowed the van to a crawl, then stopped entirely a mile out from the camp. The glow of firelight flickered in the distance, torches and lamps marking the perimeter. I killed the engine and sat in silence, watching the outlines of the base. The queen's wings buzzed louder. She pressed her body against the cage, antennae twitching as if sensing the presence of prey. The brood stirred, mandibles clicking against the mesh. I opened the back, stood face to face with them, and tapped the cage twice. Their movements stilled, eyes fixed on me. "Time to stretch your wings," I said. I released the locks. The queen stepped out first, towering 5 feet tall, her mandibles opening and closing with sharp precision. Behind her, 35 of the brood spilled out, wings unfolding, bodies humming as they tested the desert air. They clustered around her, their movements in perfect rhythm, waiting for her direction. I pointed toward the glow of the camp. "Go." The queen buzzed sharply, and the brood surged forward. The sound of their wings cut through the desert night as they closed the distance. Within seconds, the first screams echoed from the camp. The swarm descended on the 10 rings guards, mandibles tearing, wings striking, bodies slamming into men and knocking them to the sand. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks splitting the air, but the brood moved too quickly. Bullets sparked off reinforced carapaces, wings carried them out of range, mandibles clamped down on weapons and tore them away. The camp fell into chaos. Men shouted in Dari and Arabic, calling orders that were drowned out by the sound of buzzing wings and tearing flesh. Tents collapsed as broods slammed into their supports. Fires spread as lanterns were knocked over. Vehicles rattled as the insects swarmed across them, tearing through tires, shattering glass. I stepped out of the van, the queen at my side. She was calm, her movements steady, her antennae twitching as she directed the brood. Every strike, every motion, every tear was coordinated. This wasn't random violence. This was a hive at work. We moved forward together, the sand crunching under our feet. The swarm cleared a path in front of us, cutting down guards and scattering survivors. The queen stayed close, her mandibles clacking softly, wings vibrating but not taking her into the air. At the center of the camp stood the cave. Guards clustered near its entrance, rifles raised, shouting as they tried to hold their line. The brood hit them from both sides, wings buzzing, mandibles snapping. The rifles clattered to the ground. The men followed seconds later. I stepped through the entrance, the queen ducking behind me to fit inside. The tunnel stretched forward, lit by hanging lamps. Shouts echoed deeper in, frantic and sharp. The queen's wings buzzed once, but I held up a hand. "Stay behind me," I said. She obeyed. We moved deeper, until the tunnel opened into the workshop. And there he was. Tony sat hunched over a workbench, sparks flying as he welded a piece of metal. The frame of the suit loomed behind him, the mark eye, its bulky shape unmistakable. Yinsen was on the far side, sorting through tools. Both of them froze when they heard us. Tony spun around, eyes wide. His mask was pulled up, exposing his face. Sweat ran down his temple, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief. "You," he said. I smiled, raising a hand in a small wave. "Miss me." He dropped the tool with a clatter and crossed the workshop in 3 quick strides, grabbing my arm and pulling me behind him. His body was tense, his movements sharp. "What the hell are you doing here? Do you know where this is? Do you know who?" He cut himself off, eyes darting past me. The queen stepped into the light. Tony froze. His entire body went rigid as his eyes widened. She towered over him, mandibles clicking softly, wings half spread. Behind her, the faint buzz of the brood echoed down the tunnel, waiting outside. Tony shoved me further behind him, one arm outstretched as if to shield me. His voice was low, urgent, almost panicked. "What is that?" I grinned, cheerful as ever. "Relax, that's mine." He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Yours." "My pet," I said, tone light. I patted the queen's leg. She clicked her mandibles but stayed still. "She helps me out." Tony's mouth opened, then shut. His eyes flicked between me and the queen, disbelief clear in every line of his face. "Pet," he repeated. "Yeah, she's friendly, mostly," I smirked. "Unless you're, one of the guys outside, then not so much." Behind Tony, Yinsen stepped forward cautiously, his eyes wide but curious. He looked between the queen and me, then back to Tony. Tony dragged a hand down his face, muttering under his breath. Then he snapped his gaze back to me. "You can't be here," he said sharply. "Do you understand? This place is dangerous. He cut himself off again, staring at the Queen. "And you brought that." "She's useful," I said. "Trust me, you'll see." Tony exhaled hard, shaking his head. His hand gripped my shoulder tightly, his body still angled as if to block me from the Queen. His eyes softened for just a moment, worry cutting through the shock. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. I smiled faintly, tilting my head. "What, and leave you here? No chance." The Queen buzzed softly, her wings vibrating against the stone walls. Chapter 7. Leaving the cave. Tony paced back and forth, hands running through his hair, eyes flicking between me, the Queen, and the incomplete suit standing in the corner of the workshop. The welding torch lay abandoned on the floor, sparks already dead. His breathing was sharp, shallow, uneven, as if every new second made his decision harder. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, voice clipped, but this time his tone was more resigned than angry. "You're making this more complicated." I leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed. That's kind of my specialty. His head snapped toward me, irritation flashing in his eyes, but he didn't bite back. Instead, he turned to the mark the armor loomed tall and bulky, still incomplete but close. The plating was welded on, though uneven in places. The flamethrowers sat on the workbench, not yet attached. The boots had been tested but not finalized. Tony stepped forward, running his hands along the chest plate, as if checking for flaws. "We can't wait," he said suddenly. "It's not finished, but it'll work." Yinsen frowned from the other side of the room. "Are you certain? Without full testing?" "We don't have time to test," Tony snapped, then caught himself, exhaling. His eyes softened when he looked at Yinsen. "It'll work enough to get us out. That's all that matters." I pushed off the wall, a grin tugging at my lips. Finally, some action. Let's get moving before anyone decides to regroup. Tony shot me a look. "You think this is funny?" "A little," I admitted cheerfully. Then more seriously, "But you know I've got your back." His gaze lingered on me for a moment before he turned away, muttering under his breath. He climbed into the mark eye with Yinsen's help. The suit groaned as the joints shifted, the plates clanging as Tony adjusted himself inside. The sound of hydraulics filled the room when he powered it on. Lights blinked across the chest plate, glowing faintly as the arc reactor fed energy into the frame. Yinsen grabbed a rifle from the corner and tossed another to me. I caught it easily, checked the magazine, and slung it across my shoulder. The weight was familiar. I had trained enough times in this life to know my way around a weapon. Tony's voice echoed through the speaker system in the suit, low and mechanical. "Stay behind me when we move, both of you." I chuckled. "Sure, you'll be the big, shiny target." The Queen shifted beside me, her wings buzzing softly. Tony tensed at the sound, his armored head turning slightly toward her, but he said nothing. We moved as a group toward the tunnel. Tony's heavy steps clanged against the stone floor, each one steady but slow. Yinsen and I flanked him, rifles ready, the Queen keeping close at my side. The air grew hotter as we neared the entrance, the faint smell of smoke drifting in from outside. Then we stepped into the open. The camp was unrecognizable. Blood stained the sand in dark pools, bodies sprawled across the ground in twisted shapes. Rifles lay scattered, magazines spilled, vehicles torn apart with their tires shredded, and windshields smashed. Fires burned in collapsed tents, smoke rising into the night sky. The buzzing of wings still echoed faintly, though the brood had already finished most of their work and lingered on the edges, guarding the perimeter. Tony froze for a moment, helmet turning slowly as he took in the destruction. His breathing came over the speakers, sharp and uneven. "What the hell did you bring here?" he muttered. I shrugged lightly, keeping my grin. "Told you, my pet." His head snapped toward me, the suit's eyes glowing faintly. "That's not a pet. That's—" He cut himself off, shaking his armored head. Forget it, just stay close. I patted the queen's leg, and she buzzed softly in response, mandibles clicking once. She didn't move to attack. She simply stayed by my side, her bulk steady, wings folded back. Yinsen stepped carefully over a body, his rifle raised, eyes scanning the area. "They'll have heard this," he said quietly. "Reinforcements will come." "Then we don't give them the chance," Tony replied. His voice was firm now, the suit speakers making him sound colder than he meant. We moved forward through the carnage. Tony led, each step of the mark I crushing the sand beneath its weight. Yinsen and I followed close, rifles at the ready. The queen shadowed us, her antennae twitching constantly as she scanned for threats. A guard stumbled out from behind a wrecked vehicle, his rifle half raised. Before he could fire, one of the brood swooped in from above, mandibles clamping down on the weapon and tearing it free. The man screamed, but the brood pulled him to the ground, wings buzzing furiously. Tony flinched at the sight, his armored hands clenching into fists. He didn't say anything, though. He just moved faster. The path toward the edge of the camp was littered with more bodies. Some still twitched faintly, alive but broken. Others were silent. The smell of blood grew heavier, mixed with smoke from the burning tents. "Lovely place," I muttered, wrinkling my nose. Tony shot me a sharp look over his shoulder. "You think this is a joke?" I grinned, a little less fun for them. His sigh crackled over the speakers, but he didn't answer. We reached the far side of the camp. The open desert stretched ahead, moonlight casting a pale glow across the dunes. The brood gathered at the perimeter, wings buzzing as they regrouped. The queen stepped forward, her mandibles clacking softly as she surveyed the field. Tony stopped, turning toward me and Yinsen. "We move now. Don't stop. Don't split up. Stay behind me and—" Gunfire cut him off. A small group of 10 Rings fighters had regrouped near the watchtower, rifles blazing. Bullets sparked off Tony's armor, pinging against the metal. Yinsen and I dropped low, returning fire. My shots cracked sharply in the night, cutting 2 of them down. Yinsen hit another, his aim steady despite the tension. The brood surged forward on command from the queen. Wings buzzed furiously as they descended on the last few fighters, tearing rifles from their hands and dragging them to the sand. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it had started. The night grew quiet again. Tony lowered his arms slowly, the metal groaning. His breathing came heavy through the speakers. "Keep moving," he said, voice low. We pushed forward into the open desert, leaving the camp behind us. Chapter 8. Escape into the dunes. The desert stretched wide before us, quiet now except for the faint buzzing of the brood circling overhead. The sand shimmered faintly in the moonlight, the horizon endless in every direction. The 10 Rings, camp behind us, was burning, smoke curling into the sky, carrying the stench of fire and blood. Tony's heavy steps echoed against the sand, each clang of the mark I distinct in the still night. He turned his armored head slightly, the glowing eyes of the helmet flicking between me and Yinsen. "You realize this is insane, right?" His voice crackled through the suit's speakers, sharp and edged with exasperation. "You show up out of nowhere, drag, whatever the hell that thing is." He gestured stiffly toward the queen. "And now I'm walking out of here in an unfinished suit that hasn't even been field tested." I grinned despite the seriousness of the situation. "You've done dumber." Tony scoffed loudly. "Oh, really? Name one time I've done something dumber than this." "College," I said without missing a beat. "The tequila thing, remember?" He froze mid-step, his helmet locking on me. "That doesn't count." "It counts," I said cheerfully. Yinsen chuckled softly under his breath, shaking his head as he adjusted the rifle in his hands. "You two are exactly the same." "Don't lump me in with him," Tony shot back, pointing a metal finger at me. "I'm not the guy who keeps a 5-foot bug for a pet." The queen buzzed softly at his words, her wings vibrating once. Tony stiffened, muttering through the speakers, "And it reacts. Great." "She likes you," I teased. "Yeah, well, The feeling isn't mutual. We kept walking, our pace steady. The brood fanned out around us, some flying low, others circling higher in the sky. Their buzzing grew louder when they sensed movement in the distance, but it always turned out to be nothing more than shifting sand. After nearly an hour, the outline of the truck came into view, half buried where I had left it. The van looked small against the vast desert, but it was exactly where I needed it to be. Tony slowed his pace, the suit groaning as he tilted his head toward me. "You brought a truck into the middle of the desert. What, did you have a whole plan for this?" I smirked. "Pretty much. I figured you'd need a ride." "Aha," he said flatly. "And you didn't think to, I don't know, just pick me up before I got dragged into a cave." I shrugged. Character development. Tony stopped walking, his helmet locking directly onto me. "You're kidding." "Nope." Yinsen laughed again, though the sound was strained. The man's steps were growing slower, his breathing heavier. He had kept up with us, but I could see the strain in the way he gripped his rifle. Tony noticed too. He turned toward Yinsen, his voice losing some of its edge. "We're almost there, just a little longer." Yinsen gave a tired nod. "I can manage." When we reached the truck, I opened the back and guided the queen inside first. She crouched low, wings folding tightly against her body to fit. The brood clustered around her, filling the remaining space quickly. Their buzzing filled the vehicle, steady and rhythmic, but they settled without issue. Tony eyed them warily as he climbed into the passenger seat, the mark eye groaning against the frame. "If one of those things spits acid or whatever bugs do, I'm suing." I laughed as I slid into the driver's seat. "Good luck with that." Yinsen climbed into the back, rifle still in his hands, settling himself against the side. His eyes darted once to the queen, but he didn't flinch when she shifted beside him. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting through the dark. I pressed the pedal, and the truck lurched forward, tires grinding against the sand until they found traction. We sped across the desert, the night wind rushing through the cracked windows. Tony sat stiffly, the suit clanking with every bump. "So let me get this straight. You spent God knows how much money on building a hive for giant bugs, and your plan was what? To keep them as pets, open an exotic zoo. What exactly is this?" I grinned, eyes fixed on the road. "I call it insurance." "Insurance?" His voice spiked in disbelief. "You know what normal people call insurance? Geico, State Farm. They don't call a 5-foot bug with knife jaws insurance." "State Farm doesn't fight terrorists," I said simply. Yinsen covered his mouth, but I could see the smile tugging at his lips. Tony groaned loudly. "You're impossible." The desert stretched on, the horizon unchanged, but the map on my dashboard showed the coordinates of the airstrip. The jet was waiting. Once we reached it, we'd be clear. After nearly 2 hours of driving, the faint glow of runway lights appeared ahead. The sight made Yinsen exhale in relief, his shoulders slumping slightly. Tony sat straighter in his seat, his armored hands flexing. "Finally," he muttered, "I'm going home." The truck rolled up the tarmac, the jet looming ahead, sleek and ready. The pilot stood at the bottom of the stairs, clipboard in hand, his expression tense as he saw us approach. He didn't ask questions. He just moved aside as I stopped the truck near the ramp. The brood stirred restlessly in the back, wings buzzing as the queen shifted. I turned in my seat, clapping my hands twice. They stilled immediately, eyes fixed on me. Tony stared, his helmet turning slowly. "You trained them." "Of course," I said. "What kind of pet owner doesn't train their pets?" Tony muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. It took nearly half an hour to load the queen and brood into the cargo hold of the jet. The crew moved carefully, sweat beading on their foreheads as they worked, but none dared speak. The sight of the massive insect and her swarm was enough to keep their mouths shut. When everything was secured, I guided Tony and Yinsen into the passenger cabin. Tony groaned as he lowered himself into one of the seats, the mark-eye creaking under his weight. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. You love it, I teased. He pointed a metal finger at me. No, I hate this. I hate that you're here. I hate that you brought whatever that thing is, and I hate that you're enjoying this. I leaned back, smirking. Admit it, you're impressed. The helmet turned slowly, the glowing eyes locking onto me. After a long pause, Tony sighed heavily. You're insane. I chuckled. And you're alive, you're welcome. The engines roared as the jet began to taxi down the runway. Within minutes, we were airborne, the desert shrinking below us. The cabin hummed with steady vibration, the noise of the engines mixing with the faint buzz of wings from the cargo hold. Tony sat silently for a while, his hands resting against the armrests, his breathing steady but sharp. Yinsen leaned back with his eyes closed, exhaustion etched across his face. I watched them both, then leaned forward, my voice lighter than the weight of the moment. So, where do you want me to drop you off? Vegas, Malibu, or straight to a hospital? Tony turned his helmet toward me slowly. Hospital, then Malibu, in that order. Got it, I said, grinning. The jet climbed higher, the stars bright against the dark sky. Chapter 9. The Growing Hive. The wheels of the jet touched down on the private airstrip near the hospital. The cabin jolted lightly as the brakes slowed us, the engines humming in steady rhythm. Tony shifted uncomfortably in the Mark I, the suit's bulk filling more than one seat. His helmet tilted toward me. Hospital first, he said firmly through the speakers. Yeah, I know, I answered. You look like crap. I look like crap, he repeated, his voice spiking with disbelief. You're covered in sand, sweat, and probably bug juice. Don't start with me. I grinned, leaning back. You're welcome, by the way. Tony groaned loudly, dragging a metal hand down the front of his helmet. Yinsen chuckled softly beside him, though the exhaustion in his face was clear. The jet slowed to a stop, and the cabin door opened with a hiss. A medical team waited on the tarmac, their coats flapping in the wind. 2 gurneys rolled forward, nurses ready with IVs and equipment. Tony refused the gurney outright, waving it off with a clunky metal hand. No, help him first, he said, gesturing toward Yinsen. His tone left no room for argument. Yinsen hesitated, his hand gripping Tony's shoulder briefly. Then he allowed the medics to guide him onto the gurney. His eyes flicked to me as they wheeled him out, and I gave him a reassuring nod. You'll be fine, I said. He smiled faintly before disappearing down the ramp. Tony stood slowly, the Mark I groaning as he moved. The suit was heavy, awkward, but he refused assistance. Just get me a place where I can get this thing off, he muttered. The doctors led him into the building, already shouting instructions. I followed halfway before stopping. My part here was done. Tony was alive, Yinsen was in good hands, and the hospital could handle the rest. I turned, walked back up the ramp, and into the jet. The brood in the cargo hold buzzed softly as I approached, their wings vibrating against the mesh of their reinforced enclosures. The queen crouched low in the center, her mandibles clacking once as she saw me. Her eyes reflected faintly in the dim light. Time to go home, I told her. The flight back was uneventful. The brood settled quickly once we were in the air, their buzzing steady, rhythmic, almost like the hum of the engines. I leaned back in one of the seats, arms crossed, eyes closed, letting the hours slip by. When the jet finally touched down near my property, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Home. The crew helped unload the queen and her brood carefully. They didn't ask questions, their faces pale and their hands shaking slightly as they worked, but they didn't stop either. The money was more than enough to keep them quiet. I guided the queen's cage onto the transport truck and drove it myself back to my private facility. The night air was cool, the stars steady overhead, the road familiar after years of making this trip. By the time I pulled into the underground entrance and descended into the hive base, the brood was stirring restlessly again. The queen pressed against the bars of her cage, her mandibles clacking softly. The moment the cage door opened, she stepped out, wings buzzing once as she stretched. The brood followed immediately, clustering around her, their antennae brushing against her legs as if greeting her. I smiled, satisfied. Welcome back. I led them deeper into the hive base. The air grew warmer, thicker with humidity. The soil pits stretched wide, tunnels already burrowing deep into the earth. The feeding platforms were scraped clean, proof that the colonies had been busy. The sight that greeted me was better than I expected. The queens I had left behind had been working tirelessly. Ant queens huddled in their chambers, their swollen abdomens pulsing as they laid eggs. Termite queens filled their tunnels, their workers scurrying around them with fresh soil. Wasps perched high, their nests already forming along the stone walls. Even the beetles had multiplied, their burrows filled with new larvae. Clusters of eggs dotted the chambers, some glistening with freshness, others already cracked open. Tiny larvae squirmed, tended by workers. In some chambers, small drones had already emerged, wings buzzing as they tested the air. I counted carefully as I walked, not exact but close enough. Over 100 now, maybe more. The queen bee returned to her chamber without hesitation. She crouched low, antennae brushing the soil, mandibles adjusting the space where her first cluster had been laid. The brood followed her inside, wings buzzing softly as they settled around her. I stood with my arms crossed, taking it all in. This was progress. I pulled out my logbook and wrote down everything I saw. New hatchlings, egg clusters, worker activity, tunnel expansions. Every detail mattered. The colonies were growing faster than I had projected. The environment was perfect. I moved to the feeding chambers, pulling out slabs of frozen meat from storage. I hauled them onto the platforms, spreading them evenly among the species. Immediately, the chambers stirred to life. Ants swarmed over the meat, their mandibles slicing off strips. Termites dragged fibers into their tunnels. Wasps descended in groups, tearing at the flesh. Beetles clamped down with heavy jaws, dragging portions back to their burrows. The sound filled the base, chewing, buzzing, clicking. I leaned against the wall, watching. A grin tugged at my lips. Not bad at all. For an hour, I moved through the chambers, checking humidity, adjusting temperatures, making sure the egg clusters were stable. The brood obeyed instantly when I tapped the floor, their wings folding, their movements stilled. Their loyalty was absolute. By the time I returned upstairs, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, but I was satisfied. The hive base was thriving. The queen bee was laying steadily. The other queens were following suit. The numbers were rising quickly. I sank into the chair in the control room, flipping on the monitors. Each camera flickered to life, showing the chambers below. The sight of dozens of insects moving in perfect coordination filled the screens. Eggs, larvae, drones, queens, all working in rhythm. Over 100 already, soon far more. I leaned back, arms behind my head, and let out a breath. Soon things were going to get busy. I knew the world wouldn't stay quiet forever. Conflicts were already building, pieces moving into place, and eventually there would be bigger threats. Threats like Loki's invasion. I tapped the monitor lightly, smiling to myself. I'll be ready, Chapter 10, Ironmonger. The night at Tony's Malibu mansion had started quiet. The lab was filled with the steady hum of machines, the flicker of monitors, and the faint metallic clatter of tools as Tony adjusted the plating on his Mark III. I stood off to the side, leaning against one of the support beams, watching him work with the same mix of awe and amusement as always. "Do you ever stop?" I asked. Tony didn't even look up, his tone sharp but distracted. "If I stop, I die. That's how progress works." I smirked. "Or you could take a nap, just saying." Before he could reply, Jarvis' voice echoed through the lab, calm but edged. "Sir, I'm detecting an anomaly. Unauthorized access at the main entrance." Tony froze, wrench still in his hand. His head turned toward the monitors. The feed flickered, showing movement outside. The ground trembled faintly. A massive shadow passed across the camera. Tony's eyes widened. Oh no. The mansion shook violently as metal crushed through the front wall. Dust filled the air, lights flickered, and debris rained from above. The shape that stepped into view was monstrous. The ironmonger suit, towering heavy, plates gleaming under the artificial lights. The cockpit shield slid back, and Obadiah Staines' face appeared, cold and set. "Tony," he said flatly. Tony's jaw tightened. He threw the wrench aside and stepped toward the mark. Aye. Uncle Obi, you really couldn't just call." Obadiah didn't answer. The ironmonger's arm lifted, servos groaning, and a heavy weapon slid into place. "Get back," Tony snapped at me, his voice sharp. I didn't argue. My eyes narrowed, my cheerful mask fading as I reached into my jacket. My hand brushed the small remote. I clicked it once. Deep beneath the earth, locks disengaged. My hive base shifted. Panels split open, shafts to the surface widening. The queens stirred in their chambers, the drones answering with a wall of buzzing. They would come. The ironmonger's weapon fired. The ground cracked as missiles slammed into the lab floor, exploding in a shower of sparks and fire. Tony dove into the mark. Aye, the plates sealing around him with mechanical precision. The arc reactor in his chest lit bright through the armor, his face hidden beneath the helmet as it locked in place. "JRVIS, power it up," Tony ordered. The suit roared to life, blue light flooding from the repulsors in his palms and chest. He raised his arms just as Obadiah fired again. The missiles detonated against Tony's repulsors, light against light, the shockwave rattling the walls. I ducked behind cover, rifle in hand, watching as the two suits collided. Tony launched upward, boosters flaring, slamming into Obadiah's chest. The ironmonger staggered back, metal grinding against concrete, but recovered quickly. His massive arms swung wide, backhanding Tony across the lab. The mark III slammed into the far wall, leaving a crater in the concrete. "Tony," I shouted, my voice sharp. His groan echoed faintly through the suit's speakers as he pushed himself up. "I'm fine. Stay back." Obadiah advanced, footsteps like thunder. "You stole my idea," he growled. "My legacy, and now you're going to die for it." Tony's repulsors flared again, slamming a blast into Obadiah's chest. Sparks flew, but the ironmonger barely slowed. His armor was thicker, heavier, reinforced. He barreled forward, grabbing Tony by the torso and hurling him through another wall. The mansion groaned as its structure gave way. I gritted my teeth. Enough waiting. I pressed the remote again. Outside, the ground split as the hive tunnels opened fully. The sound of wings filled the night, a steady wall of buzzing that grew louder with every second. The first swarm poured upward, queens leading, drones following in a storm of movement. Their silhouettes cut across the mansion's broken walls as they closed in. Tony staggered to his feet, repulsors glowing faintly. His voice came through the speakers, strained. "What the hell is that sound?" "Back up," I called cheerfully from behind cover. Obadiah turned, his face twisting with confusion as the swarm descended. The first wave of brood slammed into his armor, wings buzzing furiously, mandibles clamping down on the plates. Sparks flew where they bit at wires and seams. The ironmonger staggered, swiping at them with his massive hands, crushing some Medea. But more came. The bee queen landed hard against his back, her mandibles scraping at the reactor housing. Ant soldiers swarmed up his legs, their mandibles biting into cables. Wasps darted in from every angle, slamming into his visor, forcing him to raise an armored hand to shield his eyes. Tony used the distraction, launching forward with both repulsors blazing. The blast slammed into Obadiah's chest, forcing him back through the ruined wall and out onto the driveway. Concrete shattered beneath their weight as the two armored titans clashed. I sprinted out after them, rifle in hand, the queen buzzing at my side. The driveway lit with explosions. Obadiah's missiles fired wildly, some detonating against the swarm, others slamming into the cliffside, sending chunks of rock tumbling into the ocean below. Tony darted around them, his boosters firing as he maneuvered for position. "You can't win, Tony," Obadiah roared from inside the cockpit. "This is my company, my technology." "Funny," Tony shot back, his voice sharp through the Mark III speakers. "I thought it was mine." Their suits collided again, metal grinding, sparks flying. The ironmonger's sheer size pushed Tony back step by step, forcing him toward the edge of the cliff. "Tony," I shouted. He grunted, straining against Obadiah's strength. "Little busy." The brood swarmed harder, dozens of them tearing at the ironmonger's joints, their wings buzzing so loud it shook the air. The wasp queen rammed into his shoulder, denting the plating. Beetles clamped their jaws around exposed cables, sparks showering as wires snapped. Obadiah bellowed in frustration, his massive hand swatting another queen aside. He raised his other arm, the weapon systems charging, targeting Tony point blank. The bee queen lunged, slamming her mandibles against the weapon just as it fired. The shot detonated early, blasting both of them backward in a storm of fire and sparks. The queen tumbled across the driveway, wings scorched, but she rose again, mandibles snapping defiantly. Tony staggered back, his suit scorched but intact. He glanced toward me, his helmet tilting. "What the hell are these things?" "My pets," I said cheerfully. "You need a therapist," Tony shot back, but his voice was steadier now. The fight raged on. Obadiah charged, his suit's bulk slamming into Tony again. They crashed through a row of parked cars, metal twisting, alarms blaring. The swarm poured after them, buzzing like a living storm. I fired from the sidelines, each shot aimed at Obadiah's exposed joints, adding to the swarm's assault. Sparks flew where the bullets struck. Obadiah roared, his voice echoing from the cockpit. "You're both fools." He grabbed Tony by the helmet, lifting him off the ground. The Mark III's systems strained, the servos whirring loudly. Tony's repulsors flickered as his suit struggled under the grip. The bee queen rammed Obadiah from behind, forcing his grip to loosen. Tony dropped to the ground, boosters flaring as he launched upward, blasting Obadiah's faceplate with a point-blank repulsor shot. The ironmonger stumbled back, blinded temporarily. Tony landed beside me, panting through the speakers. "This isn't working. His armor's too thick." I clicked the remote again. More hives stirred. More brood poured out from the tunnels near the cliffs, dozens upon dozens, until the air above the mansion was filled with buzzing wings. Tony groaned. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but fine. 6 your bugs on him." I grinned, serious beneath it, with pleasure. The swarm descended in full. Chapter 11. Swarm against soldiers. The ironmonger stumbled back, sparks spraying from its chest, plating where Tony's repulsors had struck. The suit's bulk shook the driveway as Obadiah straightened again, his glare burning through the half-broken faceplate. "Stay down," Obadiah roared, his voice echoing from the cockpit. "Not my style," Tony shot back, his boosters flaring as he lifted just above the ground. I kept low, rifle raised, the queen crouched at my side. Around us, the swarm buzzed, filling the air with a steady, thunderous hum. The night sky above Malibu was black with wings, their movement blotting out the stars. Then headlights cut across the ridge. A convoy of trucks pulled up, engines roaring, tires skidding across the sand and dirt. Dozens of armed 10-rings mercenaries spilled out, shouting in Dari and Arabic as they raised their rifles. Some carried rocket launchers, others dragged crates of ammunition. They had come for reinforcement, expecting to overwhelm Tony with sheer numbers. Instead, they found the hive. The soldiers froze for only a second when they saw the swarm filling the sky. Then their leaders barked orders, and rifles snapped up. The crack of gunfire ripped through the night, muzzle flashes lighting the dark. Bullets tore into the mass of insects, wings shredded, bodies dropping from the air. The swarm didn't break. Hundreds of wasps dived first, descending in coordinated waves. They slammed into the front line of soldiers, wings buzzing, mandibles snapping. Men screamed as rifles were knocked from their hands, their arms torn open by clawed legs. The wasps darted back into the air, regrouping, then dived again, faster than the eye could follow. Ant soldiers poured from the ground tunnels, thousands strong. Their massive mandibles clicked as they swarmed the trucks, climbing up tires, biting into engines. Metal shrieked as they tore through fuel lines. One vehicle erupted in fire, the explosion shaking the ridge. Termites followed, tunneling beneath the trucks, collapsing the earth beneath them. Men stumbled, falling as the ground gave way. Beetles lumbered in behind, their jaws clamping around rifles, tearing them in half like twigs. The mercenaries panicked. Gunfire rang louder, rockets streaked into the swarm, explosions lighting the night. Dozens of insects fell in each blast, but hundreds more surged forward, unrelenting. Tony hovered just above the ground, his helmet turning sharply toward me. What the hell is this? I grinned, even as the swarm's buzzing rattled the air. That's called backup. Backup, his voice spiked with disbelief. There are thousands of them. You're welcome, I said cheerfully. Obadiah swung his massive arm, backhanding Tony midair. The Mark III spiraled before slamming into the pavement, sparks spraying as his boosters sputtered. Obadiah turned toward me, his face twisted with fury. "This is your doing," he bellowed. The Queen stepped forward, her wings buzzing in defiance. Her mandibles clacked sharply, her brood answering with a fresh wave of movement. Hundreds more poured from the tunnels, wings filling the sky until the hum was deafening. Obadiah raised his weapon, targeting the Queen. "Then you'll die with him." Tony staggered back to his feet, repulsors flaring. "Not tonight." He fired both hands at Obadiah's chest, forcing him back a step. The ironmonger groaned under the strain, servos whining as it pushed forward again. The battle split into two fronts. Tony against Obadiah, repulsors and brute force against the ironmonger's overwhelming strength. The swarm against the 10 rings, wings and mandibles against rifles and rockets. The ridge was chaos. Gunfire rattled non-stop, explosions shook the ground, and the swarm moved in waves. Wasps darted in and out, their speed making them nearly impossible to hit. Ants swarmed across fallen soldiers, dragging weapons away. Termites collapsed sand beneath heavy trucks, flipping them onto their sides. Beetles tore open crates of ammunition, scattering rounds across the ground. The mercenaries tried to hold formation, but panic spread quickly. Shouts of fear rose over the gunfire, men stumbling back as they fired wildly into the buzzing mass. Each time a soldier fell, the swarm closed in, mandibles and claws tearing through armor and fabric. I fired from cover, my rifle cracking in steady rhythm. Each shot dropped another mercenary, buying the swarm more room to advance. The Queen moved beside me, her wings vibrating, her mandibles clacking as she directed the brood. Her antennae twitched constantly, issuing commands that rippled through the swarm like a tide. Tony's voice crackled over the suit's comms, sharp with strain. "I can't hold him, his armor's too thick." "Keep him busy," I shouted back. "We'll handle the rest." Obadiah roared, his massive arms swinging wide. The ironmonger's fist slammed into Tony's chest, sending him crashing into a row of broken vehicles. Metal crumpled under the impact, alarms blaring. "Tony," I yelled, my voice sharp now. He groaned through the speakers, forcing himself upright. "I'm fine," he muttered. "I've had worse hangovers." Obadiah advanced, missiles sliding into place on his shoulder. The launchers whirred as they locked onto Tony's heat signature. Before he could fire, the Bee Queen lunged, her massive body slamming into the ironmonger's side. The impact knocked his aim wide, the missile streaking harmlessly into the ocean. The explosion lit the waves in a fiery bloom. Tony used the opening, his repulsors blazing as he launched forward, slamming into Obadiah's chest again. Sparks flew as the two suits clashed, locked in a grapple, neither giving ground. The battle with the 10 rings raged on. The mercenaries were breaking. Their trucks burned, their weapons were ripped from their hands, and the swarm pressed harder with every minute. The air was thick with buzzing, the ground alive with movement. Blood stained the sand where soldiers had fallen, their screams drowned by the constant hum. One soldier fired a rocket into the swarm, the explosion tearing through dozens at once. For a moment, the sky cleared. Then twice as many filled the gap, descending on him before he could reload. His screams cut short as mandibles closed around him. Another soldier tried to flee toward the ridge, but the ants surged forward, climbing over each other in a wall of legs and jaws. He disappeared beneath them in seconds. I reloaded calmly, the magazine clicking into place. My grin returned, sharp and cheerful. Not bad for a boring night. Tony groaned through the comms as he struggled against Obadiah's grip. You call this not bad? Better than paperwork, I called back. The ironmonger's massive hand clamped down on Tony's helmet, forcing him to his knees. Sparks showered from the Mark III as its servo strained. Obadiah's voice boomed from the cockpit, filled with triumph. You can't win, Tony. The Queen screeched, her wings vibrating furiously. She and her brood swarmed the ironmonger's back, mandibles snapping, claws tearing at joints. Sparks flew as they ripped into exposed wires. Obadiah roared in frustration, his suit staggering under the onslaught. Tony seized the opening, his repulsors blazing point-blank into Obadiah's chest. The ironmonger stumbled back, metal groaning, servos screaming. The swarm pressed harder. The mercenaries were nearly gone, their rifles silent, their bodies scattered across the ridge. Only a handful remained, retreating in panic as the swarm closed in. The ridge was fire and smoke, the ocean glowing faintly from the earlier blasts. I lowered my rifle, satisfied. Tony, I shouted, serious now. It's just him left. Finish it. Chapter 12, the arc reactor. The ridge was fire and smoke. Trucks burned, twisted metal lay scattered, and the mercenaries were gone. What remained was only Obadiah in the ironmonger suit, Tony in the Mark III, and the thousands of wings filling the night air above Malibu. Obadiah's suit groaned as he forced himself upright, sparks showering from the wires the brood had torn. His massive shoulders heaved with every breath, his eyes burning through the half-broken visor. You can't stop me, he shouted. This is my company, my future. Tony's voice came through his helmet, clipped and strained. You really need to let it go, Obi. The ironmonger charged. The ground shook with every step, the driveway cracking beneath his weight. Tony's boosters flared, his body launching upward just as Obadiah's fist slammed into the ground where he had been standing. Concrete exploded outward in shards. The swarm moved in unison. All 100 queens had risen from the hive tunnels, their wings buzzing in rhythm. They were larger now, stronger than before. Some were nearly twice the size of a man, their mandibles reinforced, their wings powerful enough to lift heavy loads. Drones poured around them in countless numbers, following every twitch of their antennae. The first wave struck Obadiah's back. A cluster of queens landed on his armor, mandibles clamping into the plating. Their strength was immense. The ironmonger's servos groaned under the strain as they pried at seams and joints. Sparks flew where they ripped into exposed wiring. Obadiah roared, spinning wildly to throw them off, but the queens held on. Their legs dug into the armor, claws scraping as they tore. Dozens of drones followed, swarming his limbs, snapping at his weapons. Tony landed behind him, firing both repulsors directly into the weakened plating. The blast burned across Obadiah's back, smoke pouring from the wound. Nice shot, I shouted, grinning as I fired my rifle into the exposed wires. Tony glanced briefly in my direction. Remind me to never ask what you've been doing at home. You just get jealous, I teased. The ironmonger swung wildly, swatting drones aside. He reached over his shoulder, ripping one queen free and crushing her in his massive hand. Her body cracked, wings snapping, but even as she fell, two more replaced her, their mandibles snapping as they tore into his armor. They're stronger than you thought, I called. Good for me, Tony muttered, launching upward again. Obadiah staggered toward the mansion, his massive legs tearing through walls and supports. The structure groaned as he forced Tony backward, step by step. The swarm pressed after them, wings buzzing in a deafening roar. "Where is he going?" I shouted. Tony grunted through the comms, straining against Obadiah's grip. "The arc reactor. He's heading for the reactor." I clicked my remote again, and more swarms surged upward from the tunnels, joining the fight. The air above Malibu was alive, the sky black with wings. The Queens directed their forces in coordinated strikes, each wave hammering Obadiah's armor. We followed as the fight crashed through the mansion and into the open industrial yard. The arc reactor loomed above, its massive turbines glowing faintly, the heart of Stark Industries. Tony slammed into the ground, Obadiah's hand crushing down on his chest plate. Sparks rained as the Mark III strained under the pressure. Tony grunted in pain, his repulsors flickering. "Tony," I shouted, voice sharp. The Queens answered my call before I could give the order. A dozen of them swarmed Obadiah's arm, their mandibles biting into his wrist joints. Metal screeched as they tore, sparks flying as cables snapped. The ironmonger's grip faltered just enough for Tony to blast himself free. He stumbled back, boosters sputtering, his breathing heavy through the comms. "I owe your bugs one." "You owe me one," I corrected cheerfully. The ironmonger straightened again, his weapons flaring. Rockets launched from his shoulders, streaking toward the swarm. Explosions ripped the sky, dozens of drones shredded instantly. But the Queens endured, their bodies scorched yet unbroken, their wings buzzing harder. Obadiah's voice boomed. "You can't win, Tony. I built this suit to be unstoppable." Tony hovered a few feet off the ground, his voice sharp through the helmet. "Then let's test that theory." He blasted forward again, repulsors blazing. Obadiah met him head-on, the two suits colliding with a crash that shook the ground. They grappled, sparks flying, metal grinding as they pushed against each other. The Queens swarmed over Obadiah's legs, their claws digging deep, forcing his movements slower. Ant soldiers crawled up his frame, mandibles biting into hydraulic lines. Termites chewed through wires exposed by the Queens, their jaws snapping in rhythm. Obadiah roared, struggling to stay upright. "Get off me." Tony's voice cut sharp through the speakers. "Not happening." He fired his chest repulsor directly into Obadiah's torso. The blast lit the night, tearing through the weakened plating. Obadiah staggered back, smoke pouring from the wound. The ironmonger reeled, his steps dragging him onto the roof of the arc reactor. The massive structure hummed beneath him, its turbines glowing brighter as the battle shook the building. Tony landed heavily on the platform, his boosters sputtering. His voice crackled through the comms, sharp. "Pepper, we're on the roof. Overload the reactor when I give the signal." I sprinted up after him, the Queen at my side, her wings buzzing in fury. The other Queens swarmed the edges of the platform, drones pouring across the metal. The roof shook under the weight of the battle, sparks flying as Obadiah swung wildly at everything around him. "Pepper," Tony shouted again, his voice edged with strain. "Tony, you'll die," her voice echoed faintly through the comms. "Just do it," he barked. The Queens swarmed one last time, their mandibles tearing at Obadiah's chest plate, forcing it wide. The glow of his stolen arc reactor lit the night. Tony raised his gauntlet, repulsor charging. His voice was firm, steady. "This is your last chance, Obi." Obadiah roared, lunging forward. "Pepper now," Tony shouted. The turbines flared. The arc reactor overloaded, energy surging upward in a brilliant wave. Obadiah froze, his armor sparking violently, his screams echoing as the suit systems fried. The swarm scattered back, wings buzzing furiously as the blast engulfed him. When the light faded, the ironmonger was gone. A smoking wreck collapsed across the roof. Tony staggered, his suit sparking, his voice faint. "It's over." The Queens landed beside me, their antennae twitching. The brood gathered around, wings buzzing low, waiting for my command. I grinned, relief settling into my chest. Nice work, Tony. He turned his helmet toward me, the faint glow of his eyes narrowing. We're going to have a very long talk about your bugs. Looking forward to it, I said cheerfully. Chapter 13, After the Fire. The rooftop was hot under my boots, the metal still vibrating from the arc reactor's overload. Smoke poured from the ironmonger's ruined frame, its bulk slumped across the platform like a broken machine. Sparks hissed from exposed wires, and the glow of the stolen reactor in its chest flickered weakly before going dark. Tony staggered, his Mark III scorched, plates dented, servos groaning as he tried to keep himself upright. He clutched at the rail, his chest rising and falling heavily. Through the helmet, his voice was faint. That sucked. I walked toward him, lowering my rifle, the queen at my side. Her wings buzzed once before folding neatly against her back. The other queens circled the roof, their antennae twitching, their brood buzzing low as they hovered. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, scorched metal, and smoke. I smiled faintly. You did good. Good, Tony muttered, his tone flat. I almost got fried alive. Almost doesn't count, I said cheerfully. He groaned, dragging a hand across his helmet. You're impossible. Before I could reply, footsteps clattered up the stairwell. Pepper burst onto the roof, her eyes wide, her breathing sharp. She froze at the sight, Tony's armor smoking, the ironmonger wrecked, and the swarm filling the sky above. Tony, she cried, rushing to his side. She grabbed his arm, trying to steady him despite the bulk of the suit. Are you all right? Define all right, Tony muttered. Pepper's eyes darted, finally landing on me. And what? She stopped, her gaze locking on the queen's. Her words caught in her throat, disbelief plain on her face. I lifted a hand, casual. They're with me. With you, she echoed, her voice sharp. They're pets, I said simply. Pepper's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes moved over the swarm again, the buzzing filling the night air, thousands of wings beating in unison. She shook her head quickly, focusing back on Tony. We'll talk about that later. Tony's helmet tilted toward me. Oh no, we're talking about this now. Later, Pepper said firmly. I chuckled, then turned to the queens. I clapped my hands twice, sharp and deliberate. The response was immediate. The brood pulled back from the rooftop, their buzzing growing louder as they clustered together. The queens spread their wings, each one releasing a deep vibration that rippled through the swarm. Slowly, in perfect rhythm, they began to retreat. The air shifted as they peeled away from the rooftop, hundreds, then thousands, rising into the night sky. Their formation tightened, wings cutting the air in unison as they turned toward the tunnels I had opened earlier. The sound faded gradually as they disappeared into the dark, the last echoes of their buzzing drifting away. The rooftop grew quiet again. Pepper let out a long breath, her hand still gripping Tony's arm. We need to get you out of here. Yeah, Tony muttered, his voice rough. Before someone calls the fire department. I walked to the edge of the roof, watching as the last shadows of the swarm disappeared below into the tunnels. My queen buzzed softly beside me, her wings folding tightly as she crouched. I leaned against her side briefly, patting her leg. Good work. Go home. She clicked her mandibles once, then lifted into the air. Her wings carried her easily, her bulk casting a shadow across the rooftop before she vanished into the night with the others. I turned back, smiling faintly. Problem solved. Pepper gave me a look, half relief, half exasperation. Problem solved. You call this solved? I grinned. Obadiah S. done. Tony's alive. I'd call that a win. Tony groaned. I hate to say it, but he's not wrong. Pepper shook her head, muttering under her breath, then looked back toward the ruined ironmonger. Smoke still poured from its joints, its massive form crumpled. What do we do with that? Let SHIELD handle it, Tony said tiredly. I nodded. Yeah, not our problem. We stayed on the roof until the heat from the reactor faded and the smoke began to thin. Pepper called for extraction, her phone pressed tight to her ear as she spoke quickly. Tony slumped against the railing, the mark I sparking faintly, his breathing rough. I stayed back, leaning against the rail, watching the last traces of my swarm vanish. The night grew quiet again, broken only by the faint hiss of cooling metal. By the time Pepper had Tony secured with transport and medical support, I had slipped away. The drive back to my own home was silent, the road stretching dark and empty. The adrenaline from the fight lingered, but beneath it was a steady hum of satisfaction. The swarm had held their own. The queens had proven their strength, and now it was time to bring them home. I pulled into the private entrance and guided the van down into the tunnels. The underground base opened before me, warm and humid, the air alive with sound. The swarm was already settling back in. The queens crouched in their chambers, their wings folded, their antennae twitching as they released steady signals. The brood swarmed around them, reorganizing, repairing damaged nests, and tending to fresh eggs. Some drones dragged scraps of meat from the feeding chambers, while others patched tunnels with fresh soil. I walked slowly through the base, boots crunching against the stone floor. The sound of wings filled the space, steady and rhythmic. The smell of damp soil and meat hung in the air. I stopped at the queen bee's chamber. She crouched low, her abdomen pulsing as she laid a fresh cluster of eggs. Her brood surrounded her, careful and precise, as they moved each egg to the incubation pits. I crouched beside the glass, watching closely. Not bad, you've earned a break. Her antennae twitched in response. I moved on, checking the ant colonies next. Their tunnels had deepened in my absence, winding further into the soil. Soldiers patrolled the edges, their mandibles clacking softly, while workers carried larvae carefully from chamber to chamber. The queen lay at the center, her body massive, her abdomen swollen with eggs. The termites had done the same, their tunnels reinforced with chewed fibers. Their queen was nearly the size of a man now, her workers scurrying constantly to tend to her needs. The wasp queens had claimed the highest perches, their nests already expanded with fresh layers of resin. Drones buzzed steadily around them, repairing damage from the fight. The beetles moved more slowly, but their burrows had deepened. Their larvae squirmed in the soil, tended by workers who dragged meat back into the pits. Every chamber was alive, every hive stronger than before. I made my way to the central monitoring station, flicked on the cameras, and leaned back in the chair. The screens lit up with views of the hives, queens laying eggs, brood feeding, tunnels expanding, numbers climbing again. I smiled, the sound of the swarm filling the base around me. 2 weeks ago there had been 100, now there were thousands, soon there would be far more. The fight with Obadiah had proven it, they were ready for war. I leaned back further, stretching my arms behind my head. Not bad for a boring night. The hum of wings was the only answer. Chapter 14. Expanding the Hive. The hum of the hives still echoed faintly in my ears when I woke the next morning. The battle with Obadiah had ended only hours ago, yet the swarm was already back in rhythm, laying eggs, feeding, repairing nests. It was their nature to keep moving forward. I pulled myself out of bed, washed quickly, and walked to the lab. The control room glowed with the light of dozens of monitors, each one showing a different angle of the underground base. Queens crouched over their egg clusters, abdomens pulsing steadily. Workers scurried through tunnels, dragging food. Soldiers patrolled the edges of each chamber. The brood numbers were climbing fast. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded behind my head, watching. The hive base was thriving, but thriving wasn't enough. Not for what I knew was coming. The Chitauri. Their invasion force wouldn't number in the thousands. It would number in the billions. And if my swarm was going to have a chance against them, I needed numbers to match. Millions, maybe more. I sat forward, fingers tapping lightly against the desk. That meant expansion. More chambers, more tunnels, more feeding platforms, more meat. A lot more meat. I opened my laptop and logged into the banking system. Tony had accounts spread across the globe, fortunes he barely tracked. Pulling from them wouldn't make him blink. I transferred the first million quietly, routing it through shell accounts before ordering the shipment. The suppliers didn't ask questions, not when the money cleared instantly. $1 million worth of meat. Beef, chicken, pork, fish. Enough to fill refrigerated trucks that would roll in and out of my property for days. And once that was secured, I placed another order, $100 million worth. The supplier paused on the phone. That's a lot of product. Hungry pets, I said cheerfully. He hesitated, then confirmed the order. The money shut him up. I leaned back again, satisfied. That much meat would keep the swarm fed for months, maybe longer. It would also allow the queens to lay at full capacity without fear of shortage. Food was the one thing that could bottleneck growth. Now it wouldn't. The alarms on the monitors beeped softly, drawing my attention. I tapped the controls, cycling through the feeds. One of the queens had just laid a massive cluster of eggs, far larger than any before. Workers immediately swarmed over them, moving them to incubation pits. I watched closely, smiling faintly. Not wasting time, are you? The camera zoomed in automatically. Hundreds of eggs glistened in the chamber light, their translucent shells twitching faintly. Within hours, they would hatch. Within days, they would be full grown. I logged the numbers carefully in my book. Egg cluster size, growth rate, hatch time, every detail mattered. Once the first shipments of meat arrived, I brought it down into the base myself. Refrigerated crates filled the feeding platforms, stacked high with slabs of beef and pork. The smell was strong, filling the chambers as soon as I opened the containers. The response was immediate. Drones poured from their tunnels, wings buzzing in excitement. They swarmed the platforms, mandibles snapping as they tore chunks free. Soldiers carried strips back into the tunnels, feeding larvae and queens. Even the beetles dragged slabs whole into their burrows, their strength impressive despite their bulk. The queens buzzed loudly, their wings vibrating as they watched. Their antennae twitched in rhythm, directing the feeding frenzy. Their abdomens pulsed faster, eggs dropping steadily as they gorged themselves on the new supply. I walked along the platforms, arms crossed, grinning faintly. Eat up, we've got work to do. The sound of feeding filled the chambers. Chewing, clicking, tearing. The smell of raw meat hung heavy, mixing with the damp soil and humidity. It was overwhelming for anyone else, but to me, it was progress. I spent the rest of the day overseeing the expansion. The drones were already carving new tunnels into the rock, guided by my design. I mapped out chambers large enough to hold millions, reinforced by soil and resin. The tunnels stretched deeper and wider, branching like veins beneath the earth. I checked the environmental systems next. Humidity steady at 75%, temperature warm and constant, air circulation strong. The queens needed stability to produce at full strength, and I wasn't going to risk failure now. By nightfall, the hive base had doubled in size. The new chambers were ready, the brood already moving in, dragging larvae and eggs carefully into the spaces. The queens spread out, each one claiming a chamber, their abdomens swelling with fresh eggs. I stood in the central corridor, hands on my hips, watching. The hum of wings filled the base, louder than ever. The air vibrated with the sound. Numbers were climbing fast. I opened my logbook again and scribbled the new estimates. 100 queens, each laying hundreds of eggs per day. Thousands of brood hatching every 24 hours. At this rate, within weeks, there would be hundreds of thousands. Within months, millions. I smiled, my tone light, even as the weight of the numbers settled in my head. Not bad at all. I moved back upstairs to the control room, flipping on the monitors again. Each screen glowed with movement. Queens laying, drones feeding, workers digging, soldiers patrolling. The hive was alive, and it was only getting stronger. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms behind my head. This was what preparation looked like. Over the next week, the shipments arrived steadily. Trucks rolled in day and night, unloading crates of frozen meat into the storage chambers. Drivers never asked questions. The money was too good. I rotated the supply carefully, making sure nothing spoiled. Each platform was stocked daily, fresh slabs of meat dragged down into the tunnels. The brood devoured it all, never slowing, never stopping. The queens grew faster, their abdomens swelling larger with every feeding. Egg clusters multiplied, hatching faster than I could log them. Workers scurried constantly, dragging food and larvae, never resting. By the end of the week, the swarm had doubled again. Hundreds of thousands now. The air in the base shook with their wings, the sound deep and constant. The tunnels stretched for miles, new chambers filling with brood. The numbers were climbing exactly as I wanted. I leaned over the monitors, my grin wide. Millions by the time he shows up. Easy. Chapter 15. Tony's Call. The control room glowed softly in the dark, monitors casting pale light across my face. Every feed showed the hive base alive with movement. Queens crouched low, their abdomens pulsing as they laid new clusters of eggs. Workers scurried endlessly, dragging food and larvae through the tunnels. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their mandibles clacking in steady rhythm. I leaned back in my chair, one leg stretched out, tapping a pen idly against the desk as I counted. Another 100,000 added overnight. At this pace, the swarm would break 1 million before the end of the month. The phone on the desk buzzed. Stark Industries line. I frowned, straightened, and picked it up. Yeah. Tony's voice came through sharp, irritated, but steady. Care to explain why I've got a dozen accountants calling me about suspicious transactions? I grinned immediately. Suspicious? That sounds serious. Don't play dumb, Tony snapped. $1 million, then another 100 million. That's not pocket change. What the hell are you buying? I glanced at the monitors. A fresh shipment of meat was being unloaded into the feeding platforms, drones already swarming over it. Groceries, I said cheerfully. There was a long pause. Groceries. Yeah, big family. You know how it is. Tony groaned so loudly it made the speakers crackle. I just crawled out of a fight with a giant suit powered by a reactor I built in a cave. And now you're telling me you spent $100 million on food. Not all at once, I said quickly. I started small, just 1 million, thought I'd test the waters. That makes it so much better, Tony muttered. His voice grew sharper. What kind of food costs that much? What are you feeding an army? I smirked. You could say that. Tony's voice spiked. You're not joking, are you? Not even a little, I said. He sighed, the sound long and heavy. Unbelievable. You're unbelievable. I take a week to recover, Pepper's running interference with the board, and meanwhile, you're burning my money like it's monopoly cash. Technically, it's our money, I teased. Don't start with me, Tony shot back. I'm serious. What's going on? I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, my grin softening. Relax. I've got it handled. Trust me. Tony was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone was quieter, though still edged. Handled how? I saw what you brought to the fight, remember? Those things, bugs, monsters, whatever you want to call them. You're telling me you're buying them food with my money. Exactly, I said simply. You're insane. Maybe, I said cheerfully. But it worked, didn't it? You'd be toast without them. He hesitated, his silence stretching long enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve. Finally, he muttered, that doesn't make this normal. Tony, nothing about your life is normal, I pointed out. You built a suit in a cave with scraps, and it worked. That's different, he said sharply. Not really, I countered. We're both problem solvers. We just solve different problems. He groaned again, but I could hear the edge of reluctant amusement in his voice. I don't even know what to say to you anymore. Thank you would be a good start, I suggested. There was a pause. Then he said flatly, thank you. Now explain why you need $100 million worth of meat. I leaned back, grinning wide, because I don't plan small. Tony muttered something under his breath I didn't catch. Then, louder, you realize Pepper's going to find out, right? She's already breathing down my neck about the company if she sees shipments like this tied to me. Relax, I said quickly. I've got it covered. Nobody's tracing it back. They see bulk food orders, they think it's some crazy restaurant chain. No one's looking deeper. That's not comforting, Tony said dryly. Wasn't supposed to be, I teased. He groaned again, and I could picture him rubbing his temples. You're going to drive me insane. First the pet bugs, now this. What's next, world domination? Don't tempt me, I said lightly. God, Tony muttered. I can't tell if you're serious or not. Both, I admitted. He sighed again, but this time it was softer, almost resigned. All right, fine, you've got your whatever this is, but you're not dragging me into it. You understand? I smirked. You already are. Tony's tone sharpened. No, don't even start. You've got your swarm, I've got my suits. We keep those separate. We'll see, I said cheerfully. He was silent for a moment, then let out a short laugh, dry and humorless. You're impossible. Family trait, I shot back. Yeah, well, you can keep it, he said. His voice shifted again, more serious. Listen, whatever you're doing, don't screw this up. The board's already circling. I've got Pepper running herself ragged, just keeping them off me, if they catch wind of anything weird. They won't, I interrupted. Better not, he muttered. We were both quiet for a moment, the hum of the hive filling the background on my end. Finally, Tony said, You're coming by tomorrow. Pepper's demanding a family dinner. Don't be late. Wouldn't miss it, I said cheerfully. Great, Tony muttered. I'll tell her to set an extra plate for Godzilla. I laughed. She eats raw. Tony groaned one last time, then hung up. I leaned back in my chair, still grinning. The monitors glowed in front of me, the queens steady in their chambers, the brood moving in endless rhythm. The sound of wings filled the air, steady and comforting. Tony could complain all he wanted. In the end, the swarm was here to stay. Chapter 16, Dinner with Pepper. The next evening, I drove up the long stretch of road that led to Tony's Malibu mansion. The ocean spread wide beside me, waves crashing faintly in the distance. The sun was just starting to set, streaking the sky orange and pink. The driveway was empty except for Tony's cars, all polished, lined up perfectly. I parked near the edge, killed the engine, and stepped out. The house glowed faintly with warm light, the windows reflecting the ocean below. As I walked up the steps, the front door opened before I could knock. Pepper stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowing slightly when she saw me. You're late, she said. I grinned. Traffic. Her expression didn't change. We live on a cliff. I chuckled and stepped inside. Then I guess I just drive slow. She gave me a look, sharp, but not without a trace of humor, before closing the door behind me. Dinner's almost ready. Tony's in the living room. I followed her through the house, the familiar hum of machinery faint in the background. The air smelled faintly of garlic and roasted vegetables Pepper had cooked. Tony sat on the couch, a glass of water in his hand. He looked better than he had last night, though his face was still pale and his movements were slower. He glanced up when I entered. About time, he muttered. Good to see you too, I said cheerfully, dropping into the chair opposite him. Pepper moved into the kitchen, checking the oven, her voice carried back. Sit down, both of you. Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Tony took a sip of his water, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at me. So, you want to explain the bug army? I smirked. Not really. He groaned, dragging a hand down his face. Of course not. Pepper returned, carrying plates and setting them on the table. No, you are going to explain. Both of you nearly died last week, and I want answers. Tony lifted his glass. I was building answers in my garage before Obi decided to crash through my house with a tank suit. I'm not talking about that, Pepper said firmly. She looked at me. I'm talking about whatever that was on the roof. I saw them, hundreds of them, thousands of them. That's not normal. I leaned back, grinning. They're pets. Pets, Pepper repeated, her voice sharp. Big ones, I added. Tony groaned again. You're not helping. Pepper set her hands on her hips, her eyes narrowing. Do you know how terrifying that looked? I thought we were going to die. And then they listened to you, like they were waiting for you to say something. They're well trained, I said cheerfully. Pepper's expression didn't change. That's not funny. I sighed, raising my hands slightly. All right, all right. Look, I've been working on this for years. You know how Tony builds suits? I build something else. Different tools for different problems. Pepper's voice stayed sharp. And you didn't think to mention this before. I grinned faintly. Surprise. Tony chuckled dryly, though it ended in a cough. He's impossible, isn't he? Pepper ignored him. She sat down across from me, her eyes steady. What do they want? They don't want anything, I said simply. They follow orders, that's all. And you control them, she asked. Yeah, I said with a nod. Her lips pressed together in a tight line. That's dangerous. I shrugged. So is everything Tony does. Hey, Tony said, his tone offended. It's true, I pointed out. Pepper sighed, rubbing her temples. You two are going to give me grey hair. Tony raised his glass again. Too late. Pepper shot him a look, then stood. Dinner's ready. She brought the food to the table, roasted chicken, vegetables, potatoes. It smelled good, warm and filling. We sat down together, plates clattering lightly as we served ourselves. The first few minutes were quiet, except for the sound of forks and knives. Pepper ate neatly. Tony shoveled food quickly like he hadn't eaten all